we've got a 2020 370Z. It's an automatic. We are in the middle of tearing it apart because we're gonna be doing a Fast Intentions twin turbo kit on this bad boy. All our fluids are in, transmission fluid, engine oil, coolant, power steering fluid. Now it's time to get this thing fired up. All right, guys, we've got a 2020 370Z. It's an automatic, it's a base model, but you may be asking, why are we talking about it? Well, we are in the middle of tearing it apart because we're gonna be doing a Fast Intentions twin turbo kit on this bad boy. So I know we've done a video or two on the FI twin turbo kit, but you gotta get to see another one. This one's gonna be real basic install, nothing crazy, no flex fuel, no return fuel system, no frills. But we're gonna be making a lot more power than factory, and it's gonna be a really cool daily driver. So join me as we dive into this bad boy. We'll continue our teardown and we'll strap some turbos on this bad boy. All right, so before we drop the motor, because we're almost there, we need to modify this brace, this bracket that you see here that's bolted to our engine cross member, and we're gonna be adding spacers to the steering rack. So we're gonna be dropping the steering rack and putting in these angled spacers to give us more clearance with the steering shaft against the turbine housing on the driver's side. So I'm gonna put this guy back in temporarily, and we're gonna mark where we're going to modify this. And this is, again, is done so that the Greddy oil pan that's included with the kit doesn't hit these ears. So we're gonna cut these off and trim those off. And then we're gonna be drilling and offsetting a couple of these holes because of how this bolt is gonna mount with this spacer flipped. Okay guys, we've got the ears trimmed off here. We've increased this hole size to 1/4 inch. We'll set this aside. And now we're going to essentially enlarge this hole. We're going to use a hole saw. I've punched it to where we need it to be. All of the instructions are in the Fast Intention stuff. Makes it easy. Read the instructions. We'll start a little pilot hole. All right, guys, so there it is after we've drilled it out to 1 1/8 inch. So this is gonna make clearance for the bolts that hold the steering rack in. So you'll see why we had to do that, but there you go. And we'll go ahead and start by modifying the rest of our steering setup. All right, guys, we are going to be putting in our shims for the steering rack. You can see that they are angled So this is gonna give us a little bit of angle away from the turbine housing, and they're nicely labeled P. So this is for passenger side, the other side is D for driver side. So we have our top spacers installed already. We'll go ahead and put in. All right, guys. So before we drop the motor out, we got to get the oil pan off. We did everything we need to do with our steering rack fitment. Factory pan's off. We're not going to reuse that. We're going to pull off, which we've already done, the pickup tube, and included with the kit is new hardware. These two new bolts that are longer, and the reason they're longer, of course, is because we're using a bigger, larger capacity pan. We're dropping down our pickup tube. So we've got a CNC billet machined flange adapter or spacer, and we're using that now. So we've applied some Loctite to the threads. We're now ready to put on that gray oil pan. So I'm gonna get ready to silicone that bad boy in. We've got our clearance we need now by removing the ears off this plate. You don't see them anymore. It'll make fitment for our pan. And once that's all done, we'll continue disassembly, drop the motor out, and we'll begin the fun part of installing our turbo kit. All right, guys, so this is the Gritty pan. This is something Gritty came out with the introduction of the HR motor. So we know that the VHR motors, they have the same secondary pan, so this works on both of them. Really standard fare. You have some baffling here to keep oil where the pickup tube goes, and these two ports are for the turbo drains, right? So this is gonna be passenger side, and this is gonna be our driver side. So we are not gonna be doing our scavenge pump setup on this kit. Again, we're just doing a really basic, nothing crazy install. Usually we would cap this side, and we would leave this side for the pump to get the oil from the turbos back into this. And the reason why we do that, guys, is you can see that this is where the oil drain is, right, for the turbos. The issue is our oil level really is roughly right around here, to give you an idea. So oil is gonna work its way back up. It can, back into the turbo, and then you could potentially have smoking issues and oil getting into the intake side of your inlet tubing and your charge pipe. So that's why we have the scavenge pump kit. You know, again, it's not a mandatory thing. It's the cherry on top. I would recommend it for all the kits, but you know, there's more additional costs. You have the cost of the kit and you have the labor time. So with that being said, we won't fill the pan all the way up to help prevent oil from getting up. So we will usually aim for halfway mark on the dipstick. So we won't go all the way to full. So there you have it. We're gonna go ahead and get this thing siliconed. I've blown it out, cleaned it out. I actually tapped the 1/8 inch fitting here, because usually the castings, you can only get maybe 1 to maybe 2 threads of this plug in there. So I tap them out a little bit. So now we're nice and flush. It's been siliconed. That one's of course for our drain. And I'm gonna go ahead and get this prepped. All right, guys, our pan is on. Silicone's all, of course, in there. We got our drain bolt in, and we're gonna drop this thing. So let's go do that. We got this VQ37 out of its chassis, and we're gonna go ahead and start stripping things down, prepping, cleaning, making it look a little nicer like it maybe hasn't run. Always like to have it all clean. And of course, we're gonna get rid of that automatic transmission cooler that we have right there. Work on our fuel injectors, all that stuff. So let's begin the process of disassembly. All right, guys, so there is a change on these new Zona FP turbos. Again, fast intentions, twin turbo kit, but you'll take a look and see that the center section is completely brand new. It's actually really small. So the center sections before were actually really badass. You would have seen in a previous video, they were actually CNC machined billet center sections. Now they've gone to a cast setup. And the big difference is it's really, really small, right? So I don't know, maybe it's gonna be cheaper to make, but for the installer, we have a 10mm thread for the coolant. So both sides, 180 from each other. It's not 14mm anymore, it's 10mm, so it's smaller. And Fast Intentions has had to redo their lines and configurations, also change up the drain flange a little bit, because that's a little bit different. So it's definitely more compact and it's different, you know. I have to say that the CNC center section was sexier, but you know, nonetheless, these are still beautiful, badass turbos using the latest aero and billet machining. So we'll see if it does any different, but it's essentially, it's the stage 1 kit, which used to be the stage 2 kit. So these are the 2868 turbos. So we'll get these bad boys on, and we are gonna be, I'm assuming, I haven't looked at the lines, but we're probably gonna be using a -4 line now for the coolant lines, which is small, but I guess it's enough. You still get enough volume through there to cool the center sections down. So let's see what we got, and then I guess you can position them however you ever. All right, guys, we are just about prepped. We cleaned up our engine. We have our exhaust manifold studs swapped around. We removed a couple of them since we are using that alpha cover on the Zonas. It's a little bit bigger. We've moved some of our alternator wiring, made the modifications for all that stuff. We have the plastic cover that goes over the main harness. We've got our heat wrap around all of this stuff to help protect it, since our exhaust manifold is gonna wrap around with our wastegate right here, and it's all secured all nicely. All right, guys, we've just about finished prepping the engine. So we went ahead, we modified our starter cable. We removed the plastic hard casing that's off of this bad boy, modified the tang where it goes. We've moved around our exhaust manifold studs, a different configuration, and we also removed a couple of them for the larger alpha cover that's on those turbos. So we'll be using different hardware for that. On the right-hand side of the engine, we've moved our alternator wiring. It doesn't look like much, but this thing needs to point up pretty much at the 12 o'clock position, which we've done. We've moved around a couple of the studs, got rid of one of them, and we went ahead and got rid of the plastic cover, secured it with heat wrap. Also done the same thing with our crank position sensor connector and wiring. Since the exhaust manifold comes around, it wraps up. There's a lot of heat in this area, so we're protecting all that stuff as best as we can. And so now the fun part begins of where we can start bolting on our cool parts. So we're gonna be doing our exhaust manifolds next, a few of the coolant hard lines on the left-hand side of that head, and we'll slowly start getting our turbo kit on there. All right, guys, we're ready to put our exhaust manifolds, and we'll go ahead and get what I believe are exhaust manifolds and stuff out. These are gonna be our wastegate tubes. These recirculate back into the downpipe. All right, there we have them. Our cast exhaust manifolds. V-band really hasn't changed since the last time we've done one of these. Really, it was the turbos that changed quite dramatically on the center section. Okay, so we're ready to bolt these bad boys in. We've got our hardware, we're all set with this, and let's go install them. All right, guys, we fast forward just a little bit. We've got our turbos, exhaust manifolds, downpipes, wastegates, our intake tubing, all basically plumbed up. This thing is almost ready to go back into the chassis. We just got to finish up a few little details, but here we are. We've got our brand new Zonas, the new redesigned center sections we had talked about. They're all in there. All our drain hoses, we got our lines. We have our additional heat wrap on our lines, both for the coolant and also for the oil feed, and come together really, really nicely on these newer Zs. The AC compressor is different, so the plumbing's going to be affected somewhat. So it's gonna be interesting to see once we get this back in the car, how our AC compressor and our intake tube with our high pressure line is all gonna work. So you can see that our intake tube and then our breather port, which is gonna connect to the valve cover port up here, is gonna be really tight. So we may need to tweak things a little bit around once we get this thing back in there. So you'll notice now that basically from 2024 on, all the fast intention stuff now is gonna be powder coated black. So there's been a few small changes with the kit, essentially the same overall, just little things that are basically gonna get upgraded. So I personally like the black powder coating. Makes for a nice clean install and sleeper on top of it as well. So let's go take a look on the passenger side. All right, guys, so I've left the intake tube off so you can see our 2868 or 68 basically extruder size. So this is again the Zona rotor stuff. You'll see the FP logo is on there, Force Performance. Our oil line's all mounted, ready to go. We have some of our charge piping in. We have our heat protection for our alternator power cable. And again, we have our fire sleeve over our coolant line, along with our heat wrap here for our oil feed. So all plumbed, all ready to go. We have our wastegates that are gonna get plumbed next. We're gonna do a twin port configuration on our wastegates, and then it's gonna be using our Specialty Z boost control kit. And we're gonna go ahead and we'll put our intake tube on this side and continue on with our install. All right, guys, since this is an automatic, we are definitely gonna have to install a transcooler. So Fast Intentions provided us with their 19 row. It's a small little guy. For street duty, it's pretty good. You got something really, really high horsepower and you're gonna be tracking it. I would definitely recommend something bigger than this. This works with the movement and placement of our power steering cooler. So usually our power steering cooler sits down here. They've got a little kit to make it all work together. So it sits right above. And now we've also gone ahead and installed our 34 row set trab from Fast Intentions. Part of the kit, you know, if you already have a set trab, you can use your existing set trab with their kit should you not want to replace your cooler. Maybe you have a 25 row, be adequate enough, but these are 34 row and we're now just getting our lines routed. All this is good to go here up in the front. We've got everything fast and secured, and our next thing we're gonna do is our intercooler. So we'll get our intercooler, our brackets, and we'll get this bad boy mounted up. We'll finish our oil line routing, get our plumbing for the charge piping in, finish our injector install, put our intake manifold on, and we're getting inch by inch a little closer to get this thing ready to light off. All right, guys, we're at that point. We're flashing our ECU. We're gonna put our base calibration in this thing. All our fluids are in, transmission fluid, engine oil, coolant, power steering fluid, all that stuff is done. Now it's time to get this thing fired up. Always a little anxious, but should be smooth. Done so many of these. Gonna be a little bit of smoke. Hopefully the power steering pump doesn't make any whining noises, but yeah, we're good to go. Let's go take a look at it. All right, so we vacuum filled the cooling system. Leslie's gonna bring us a brand new radiator cap that has the correct pressure rating for it. We've got our boost solenoid installed. Factory returnless system, I should say, is in here. Again, nothing crazy. Probably do 85 later on down the road. But yeah, take a look at it. It's really, really beautiful with the black powder coat pipes. I love the look of it. It looks very sleeper-like, almost stock-like. So I really love the look of that. All right, once we're done flashing, let's start it up. So we have our first startup, uneventful, Everything went according to plan, no issues, a little bit of smoke, no oil leaks. It sounds great. So the next thing is we'll go ahead, we'll get our front bumper on, fender liners, wheels and tires back on this bad boy, and you're gonna see it on the dyno next. We're all wrapped up on the dyno. It did exactly what I expected out of this automatic 2020 stage 1 fast intentions twin turbo kit with the factory returnless fuel system on there. So we did put some ID 1050s in there in case the customer in the future does plan on upgrading and we do a return fuel system. It'll be a little easier to do the 85 process. But yeah, not too shabby. 10 pounds of boost right around in there. And we're about a little over 460, almost 470 wheel on 91 octane. So I love the way that this kit looks. I know I keep saying that, but it's just so, it looks like factory, right? It's not in your face and it's very sleeper-like. So we're gonna go take it out for a little drive, make sure everything is good to go with this bad boy, and then it's headed home.
Very good.
Sweet.